Hello, this is Aura Guardian. This time I have a game against Mr. D on the 1v1 ladder, which I will be trying to commentate as I play through it. On this particular map, I see a very strong South America pick here. Um, Antarctica is not a particularly strong bonus. Usually Antarctica's the main contester with South America, and um, it's stronger than Central America due to your ability to transfer between Colombia and Venezuela, in addition to being able to reach into Cuba before um, the starting pick on Baja is able to. In addition to that, it has nice expansion opportunities into Africa, West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, North Africa. So it ends up being, um, hands down, the best pick, and um, on this board, um, it's difficult to contest that or intuitively contest that pick. Of course, being that there still is some risk from Antarctica, but it's diminished because the Warlord isn't in a good position. Um, Second pick, I think I'll put as Baja. Um, well, it's not a good pick, great pick if I end up by itself. At least I'll have knowledge of Venezuela if my opponent ends up picking that. So they also go to, it also pairs nicely and makes it much easier to complete Central America if I'm in a match elsewhere early on in the game. As for the other part of the map that needs to be um, covered, um, I need to have a pick in Asia, or try to ensure a pick in Asia. Um, there's a lot of efficient bonuses here, and an uncontested Asia would be a bad idea in this distribution. So I think the best pick in the Asia region, generally speaking, will be Sweden in the Scandinavian peninsula, because I can complete this without being interrupted by another warlord. Um, well, it does run into issues of somebody coming into the doubled border in Murmansk. Um, I can still complete Scandinavian peninsula before they show up, or as they show up. After that, I think I need to be able to pick a 4-5-6 combo that is um, something that I can continue to ensure some degree of coverage in Asia, but also um, can stand on its own, and is also something that is counterable to some degree. I think in this case, I'd like my fourth pick to be East China. It's a decently strong pick. The only possible counter is Tibet, um, and that you can check as you expand in East China. East China also has access to Indonesia and Australia. Um, and for the fifth pick, I think my best bet will probably be something like West Russia. Um, if I drop one of South America and Central America, which is likely in this particular scenario because one of these two should probably be picked, um, uh, and also Scandinavia, I will end up dropping to my fifth pick in West Russia, and that will provide some degree of countering to Scandinavian Peninsula, despite how strong that bonus is. And as for my sixth pick, I need to be able to, if not counter East China, I do need to at least counter uh, West Russia. I think in this case the best sixth pick would probably be Tibet, because if I get my sixth pick, I've lost both my fourth and my fifth. So my sixth pick being Tibet will ensure I'll be able to counter East China, and I'll may or may not have Scandinavian Peninsula. Good chance I would. In that case, and that would also provide a counter to West Russia. So let me see what happens. I did drop to my fifth pick. Central America, one of Central America or South America would probably fall to my opponent. Um, and Scandinavian Peninsula also fell to my opponent. They would be able to guarantee a completion of Scandinavian Peninsula. Um, if they have the sixth pick, West China, I will lose this game. If I was my opponent, I'd probably want to try and complete both of these plus threes, or if not, at least try and fight for the completion of South America. I think what I want to do, since I know my opponent is in Central America and in the Scandinavian Peninsula, is that I need to ensure denial of Central America since my opponent will already be completing Scandinavian Peninsula. I have to go for East China and hope for the best that my opponent is not in West China. There's also the possibility my opponent did pick Australia, um, and might go after that instead first. Although with the free Scandinavian peninsula and the risk posed to Australia from Malaysia, um, it's more likely that my opponent will want to try and complete 11 and come in 2 turns. So I'll just go ahead and start working on East China. I'll attack this territory with 5, and that means I won't have to deploy this turn. Um, and I'll also, for good measure, I do want this Hong Kong attack to be delayed. So I will go for Hong Kong last order. But I don't want to dilute Venezuela at all. I want to use that as an attack on Cuba when the turn is appropriate. Okay, so Mr. D has made a move. Now we get to find out very quickly whether or not this game is on or if this game is lost. So let's see what happens. Okay, so my opponent is not in Tibet. If he was, the game would have been iced. And essentially over at that point, there would have been no way for me to prevent him from breaking East China. But since East China is completable, we have a fair shot. So this next turn is fairly simple. We just need to prioritize an attack on Cuba. If our opponent goes for a completion of Central America, stop that completion. If they don't, and just go for a counter of Cuba, expecting us to attack it, then we're essentially fine anyway. So let's do that and see what happens. So yes, it looks like my opponent was going for the completion of Cuba. Uh, there might have been an argument to say delay the attack, um, which probably would have turned out a bit better for me as far as stack-wise goes, but um, it's more important to physically control Cuba than it is to have a stack there. So that's why I ended up prioritizing the attack. Otherwise, 5 kills 3, right? And I had 4 here, so 4 armies here, so I would have hung on to this territory either way, which is why I went for the prioritized attack. But I know what my opponent was trying to do. He was trying to complete Central America and Scandinavian Peninsula. So my opponent has 8 income. I'm up 1 income. It's probable that my opponent also has Australia as a final pick. By far and away the most likely pick on the board. Probably was going for that sort of type of completion where um, he completes his 11 and then quickly completes the +5 for 16 income on turn 4. Another possibility, although much less likely, is the +4 of something like West Africa or East Africa or Indonesia, but these are slow bonuses to complete. They're not very great. It's almost certain that my opponent has Australia at this point. So with that in mind, expecting 2 deploys here and 6 deploys here. I cannot take. I'd be one income short of a guaranteed capture of Mexico. So to me, what's going to be better is just to. I think the safest play here is going to be just to deploy 7 to Cuba and just sit on the bonus, and maybe my opponent will attack me, in which case it's really good for me, or maybe my opponent won't. It's very likely, actually, that I hit first order on turn 2. It's possible that my opponent would have moved out from New South Wales to South Australia on the first turn, or on last turn. So I'm thinking based off of this deployment, A, B, B, A, B, B. It's more likely than not, although I can't guarantee it. Actually, it still probably isn't wise to attack Mexico. I should probably just sit in Mexico on this turn, because there is a possibility of a leftover coming through. I do not manage to outdelay my opponent, and he attacks back Cuba. There's a small chance of that happening and wipes me from it. There's, and I really do not wish to give up Cuba in this situation. Alright, so the next turn has progressed. Let's see what happens. I deploy 7. He deploys 3. I see 1 attack. He tries attacking me with 3. So we missed 5 income this turn. So he deployed 5 income to South Australia, took Tasmania, and took Queensland. Or something along those lines. Most likely. So, in which case, my expectation is a completion of Australia will happen next turn. We'll see 4 income next turn. So, if I expect my opponent to deploy 4 here, and I expect him for 6, I need at least an attack of 10 to guarantee a break. I'm also safe to attack Mexico this turn, so I will do so. I might as well. My opponent will be up 1 income next turn, but with broken, two of his bonuses broken, both of them being threatened, um, I should be able to get enough leverage. It requires only 4 income to complete Australia from last turn. Um, yeah, so I only see 2 income. I find the combination of attacks to be quite interesting. Deploy of 2 to Finland is not what I would have expected, because that means my opponent is clearly missing uh, um, 6 armies here. There's also a possibility my opponent went with Antarctica, which would be a weird choice. Personally think that's not the best choice, but based off of these deploys, it's definitely a possibility. What would that look like? It would look something like turn 1 taking Novo, turn 2 shuffling the leftover back to South Pole, and then turn 3 capturing Scott and Saiple for 8 income on this turn. Then on turn 4, my opponent would have had done something along the lines of taking 6 armies and capturing Argentina. It's something like that. That's another possibility. That would make sense with it. It would not make any sense for my opponent to take a +4 with this series of attacks. The reason I say that being if he had attacked 2 territories in addition to his in addition to the one he took when he initially captured with his initial warlord, then he would have been 1 territory left over from completion. Which is a really strange way to complete a bonus. It's a very inefficient way of completing a bonus. You'd rather have the armies spared on an earlier turn versus a later turn. It is a very strange looking deployment. Unless he was looking at just taking Queensland with five five armies, so that he wouldn't have to deploy next turn to capture Papa. And that would mean that my opponent would have all 15 armies to deploy to Central America and Scandinavian Peninsula on this particular turn. I could see it behave that way and add to the confusion with regards to completing Indonesia. That would be quite smart way of going about an Indonesian capture. So there's even with 15 armies to deploy, uh, I can just guarantee that I'm safe on Scandinavian Peninsula with 2 um, deploys to Norway. I need to think of a way that my opponent or attack of that my opponent might not expect. My expectation would be that my opponent at this point is probably thinking of taking Papa next turn. I don't see how he would be able to do it this turn. I think it's more likely that my opponent feels pressure to defend Central America. So I expect the majority of the plays to go there. I think going for an elimination on Scandinavian Peninsula and West Russia is probably the more likely one to fall in this scenario. Because my opponent can guarantee a defense of one of these two. If I was to guess what my opponent would do, um, I would expect some form of attack on Arkhangelsk with a little bit of income. In addition, some sort form of defense of one of these three or a combination of them. So that's what I'll go for this turn. So a first order retreat from Mexico to Cuba is probably in the cards here. In addition, some degree of delaying is important. I think a rather prioritized tap of Murmansk is important, in case my opponent decides to deploy two instead of one and just go for a casual attack of Arkhangelsk. After that, it becomes generally tricky. I have to really decide which of these territories is most likely to be defended. I think Southport, there's a good chance of a defense there, of some degree. I think the least likely territory would probably be Sweden. So I'll just attack this one the most lightly. I think I'll attack this one with about 5 armies and attack this one with 11 armies. Actually, it would be nice to get this to be an attack of 13 because people generally like to defend with efficient defenders. I don't know if there's a way to do that, however. So I don't quite have the armies I want to do what I want here. I think I expect a deploy of 4 or a deploy of um 7. If my opponent deploys 7 to Southport, um I'm pretty much won't be able to eliminate him, but hopefully I can clean him up elsewhere, and that will allow me to have a completion of Rest Russia with some degree of safety next turn. So this is the type of move I'll go for. I'll attack Finland with 8 and Southport with 8. Um, and if I get lucky, I eliminate him from Scandinavian Peninsula, because Central America will also be threatened. I still think there's a good chance that my opponent will deploy 7 to Southport, but we'll just have to see what, at least 7 to Southport, but we'll just have to see what happens here. So my opponent defended inefficiently in each of these bonuses, but was rather probably looking for attacks on each of them. Unfortunately, my opponent out-delayed me in my attack to Sweden. My opponent also went for a blockade of Central America, which I find interesting. I can also count the deploys: 2, 5, 8, 11, 15. My opponent has attacked and completed Papua New Guinea. They have 10 income. They won't be able to complete Indonesia this turn because did they use card beach? They did use their card last turn. I should be safe to complete West Russia this turn. I do need to get my income above theirs. Since I do not expect a completion of Indonesia next turn, I expect my opponent will show up to Philippines. Just to, as a form of a precursive check. I really do kind of doubt that my opponent will allow themselves to be eliminated from the American theater. But I can still try and spend 2 armies to do that. That would be nice, as that would open up South America for a possibility. I'll deploy my armies to Finland. I don't really need to be aggressive here. I think a blockade of Finland would help me to secure West Russia from future attacks. That double border is a little bit annoying defensively. So I'll go for an attack on Ufa, I'll go for an attack on Moscow, and I will blockade Finland. I want at least, let's see, what would be a nice blockade? Probably about 18 armies would be very difficult for my opponent to break in the long term. So I will, let's see, do an attack only on Sweden. No, transfer only on Sweden. I will do a transfer only to Sweden, which is an attackable territory only. I can't transfer armies to. I will never be able to transfer armies to this territory. Transfer 3 armies there. And between the 2 armies there, that will allow, assuming this first order transfer goes through, that will be 6 there. If I'm blockading Finland in front of my opponent, I need to be able to ensure I can out-delay them. So I will go ahead and then transfer the rest of my armies last order. I do have order priority this turn, so this should be sufficient to uh, allow me to complete West Russia while attempting that blockade and having a good shot at having the blockade go through on Scandinavian Peninsula. I can't necessarily guarantee it, but it'd be nice to be able to get the out delay and get that blockade off on Finland, and which has a twofold effect of keeping a completed West Russia safe and preventing my opponent from completing Scandinavian Peninsula. I also have an order delay card, which I think would come in handy this turn. I need to be able to out delay my opponent uh, and get as many orders as I can. Um, I can add another order here as well. I'm just trying to give myself as many delays as possible. After order delay, I will have the ABBA order resets. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. If I can get one more order, that would be ideal. Otherwise, there's no point in adding this extra order. I don't quite see how to add the extra order, so I'll go ahead and just transfer my armies to Venezuela. Let's see how this goes. So the next turn has progressed. Let's see what happens. I deploy 3 to Archangelisk. He deploys 8 to Salvador, deploys 2 to Panama. I deploy 2 to Mexico. I deploy 4 to Finland. My transfer from Norway to Finland is successful. That's a failed tap on Norway, which made him lose an army, but that's not particularly important. I play my order delay card, I perform my delays, and capture West Russia. I successfully performed the Terminator blockade, and I have a nice blockade on Finland now. West Russia is completed and safe. I am now 13 income to my opponent's 10. There's no indication of any capture of Philippines this turn, as well as the last turn. So now that I have secured a completion in West Russia, my opponent is going to be more pressured to break that. I suspect a more substantial deploy could be coming to Central America, although it's not particularly likely because my opponent blockaded Baja, I guess. So more likely than not, there will be a lot of armies coming into Norway next turn. My guess is that my opponent will probably look to deploy something like 8 armies here and look to capture territory in Indonesia this turn. They are feeling pressured to get another bonus completed here. And otherwise, they lose. So, expecting 8 here, deploy of 8 here. So 16 will come here. We can keep up with that. I'll just deploy 14 and I'll deploy the rest to Taiwan and I'll start working my way towards Australia. My win condition is quite simply to get Australia broken. If I can do that, the game is iced. Nevertheless, my opponent needs to break West Russia. Honestly, there's very little consequence to what occurs in Central America. Of course, it is a little bit more disadvantageous um, to my opponent if he loses presence there. So a slight deploy would not surprise me there either. Nevertheless, I think it's still important to get the card piece. So I'll capture Brazil. Um, and I'll look to delay before capture of Philippines. And we can watch what happens this turn. A little bit more surprising play here is attack on Panama most likely. Probably trying to go for a little bit more threatening of a play. Interesting choice. Capture of Mexico. I don't think that really achieves much for my opponent to do that. So my opponent didn't have Papua New Guinea yet. I might have missed a capture elsewhere. Yeah, my opponent's first two turns are accounted for. I guess it's most 2, 4, 6. This is where I'm missing 2 armies. I account for all armies here, I account for all armies here, I account for all armies here. The only 2 armies I'm missing are from this turn. Well, I expected some form of capture of Indonesia. My opponent must have captured Scott. Okay, so I'm not really under any threat in Central America. And my opponent is kind of constrained about what he can do elsewhere. So, in all honesty, a full deploy and a smash of Papa makes sense this turn. Well, he can still deploy all his income to this, prevent me from capturing a card piece. So I can go ahead and attack Papa. This attack may fail, but I can also go ahead and give a small attack to give I can go ahead and give a small attack to Norway as well. The idea being using my I don't want to use my OP card. The idea being that if this attack fails, um this attack succeeds, I'll have a second shot at a card piece here in the Scandinavian Peninsula. And up income, I do want to be taking these aggressive stances. Alright, the next turn has progressed. We can see what happens. I deploy all my income to the Philippines. I only see 6 on Papua New Guinea. And my attack succeeds. We're still looking for 4 of his income, because he's at 10 income. See a failed tap. Well, that's a tap, not necessarily failed. 1 army attack will always fail. That's just a tap. We saw a tap from Sweden to Murmansk. We capture Norway from Murmansk. We see 6 on Svalbard and 3 Sweden. There must have been 1 deploy to Sweden. I'm thinking that Scott was taken at some point, so and there was probably an extra army left over there. So South Pole has probably been captured. He'll have 3 armies there. He'll be looking for 4 deploys there. And he'll have since Mr. D has cards, we can double check, right? Takes piece, takes piece, takes piece, takes piece, takes piece. Fails to take a piece this turn by the looks of it. No, he takes a piece of Mexico, doesn't he? No, he doesn't. He doesn't take a piece on his card turn. That's interesting. Doesn't take piece, takes piece, takes piece. So I have card, he does not. If he wants to try and complete Antarctica, he'll have to have only 6 deploys. There, I can guarantee then that I can capture Queensland this turn. Actually, regardless of what my opponent tries to do, it's just a free capture. So, it's what I'm gonna do. Order priority transfer to Norway. This is fairly straightforward turn. If my opponent had his card, he could have survived with 1 income this turn. But since, as far as I could tell, my opponent, well, as far as I could not tell, my opponent did not have card piece, I can go ahead and just capture Queensland. And to ensure, increase the chance I myself get card piece, I can just go for 2 attack of 2 on Sweden. They're playing an order priority card. I'll make this a transfer only from Murmansk to Sweden first order. I don't necessarily want to lose these armies, although at this point it probably doesn't matter much, because once I break Queensland, my opponent should surrender. So really, that's all I have to do this turn. My opponent will either be on 5 income or 8 income, depending on what they do. There really isn't much they can do. They'll be down 5 income. I'll be looking to complete Indonesia soon after, and the game's pretty much over at this point. I did seem to forget to record the last bit of the video with the very last move here, but as an FYI, after capturing Australia, capturing Queensland and Australia, my opponent did surrender. In the end, it turns out that my opponent did have Scott. As for the turn where there was missing income, there was 1 extra deploy to Scott and 1 extra deploy to Western Australia. It was kind of probably just used for delays. So that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this video, and hope to see you around for the next one.